We've all felt at one point that pressure, that need to also be perfect, to have it all together. And it usually begins very early on in grade school. The importance of getting those A's, being on the teacher's list or on the principal's list, always getting that gold star at the top of the page when you got a report back. And in high school, being popular, there was pressure to be popular, to be smart, maybe to be a jock, to be one of the sportsy guys, whichever lane we chose to fit into. There was always that hierarchy of being the best. And later came when we had careers or jobs, that we were at, always needing to excel, not even to mention the pressures to be a perfect parent or a spouse or a partner, and the ongoing need that even when it's no longer appropriate or even necessary to be the perfect child. Some of us struggled with that for many, many years. This idea of being perfect is one that society has increasingly foisted on us over the past 30 or so years, maybe even longer. Like, for example, I like to cook. Most of you know that I like to cook. And I've never taken formal lessons. I'm self-taught. And I started cooking out of necessity when I think I was about 12, maybe a little younger. When my mother became ill and she had to be rushed to the hospital because she sneezed and pulled her spine and fractured a couple of discs or whatever. And I remember as she was being taken, now I have to be honest, my mother was a lousy cook. She was a terrible cook. My father was the cook in the family, really. But for some reason, this day when this happened, she decided to make a leg of lamb. It must have been the spring, I guess. And as she was being taken out on the gurney to go to the hospital, her words to me were, "Put the lamb in the oven." I had no idea what to do with a lamb. So I pulled down a recipe book and I found a recipe for lamb. I followed the recipe. I stuck the lamb in the oven. And I think I did a pretty good job. I think I did a better job than my mother would have. But I'm just saying. But that's how I learned how to cook. And over the years, I've watched, I've read, and I learned a lot from different people on cooking, and that helped. But I only use recipes these days as a template. I usually wind up reading them or watching them and saying, okay, I can do that, but I think I can tweak it a little bit. And maybe if I do such and such, it'll be a little different. Or sometimes I don't use recipes at all. I just throw things together. And for some reason, I think I have a pretty good sense of what works well. And at least nobody in my family or people who have had my food have gotten ill or died yet. So there's that. But there are times when I look at what others do, when I watch these, especially the television shows, when I watch what others are making, or I read those recipes in the New York Times or whatever, and I think, boy, I could never do that. I just don't measure up to that kind of thing. And I blame this on Martha Stewart, because Martha, is all about perfection, have the perfect pan, have the perfect pot, have the perfect kitchen. Make sure you have those perfect spices, the vanilla from Madagascar and that Himalayan pink sea salt, that everybody loves. By the way, it's not really from the Himalayas. It's made in Pakistan. It's mined in Pakistan, just so you know. So, but I remember though, when I was a kid watching Julia Child do her cooking show. How many of you remember the Julia Child cooking show? Oh, what today we're going to make, whatever it was, and she was so calm and she was so unconcerned about perfection, except in the end result. She wanted to be perfect. But if it tasted good, if the presentation was good, that to her was success. But during the prep, she knew there could be mistakes, and she would either figure out a way to fix it, or she'd say, well, we're going to chuck that and start all over. And Martha, however, is a perfectionist. It makes me nervous. It makes me very tense, that kind of approach. And so for the past year, though, this pressure to be better has been really pushed on us, especially, right? How many articles or television segments on the news or shows, talk shows or whatever, have you seen that have said something like, You have all the time in the world now with this pandemic thing. You're all isolating, you're all self-isolating and quarantining. You have all the time in the world to do better, to improve yourself. You can finally learn that language you want to learn. You can learn to speak Esperanto if you want to. You can lose weight. Obviously, these people have never been trapped inside for months at a time, because one of the only things you do is eat and cook. So losing weight was, I don't think, the goal for most people during this time. They'll say there are no more excuses for not meditating, for not doing the spiritual practices you want to do, because there aren't any other distractions. How many of you have learned to make sourdough bread this past year? I see one hand. I saw one. Two hands. Two people have learned to make sourdough bread this year. But do you know that making sourdough bread this year has been the most popular thing that people have done, especially in the area of cooking? Sourdough bread. I'm not a bread maker. I've never been a bread maker. But a week after we moved, our neighbor from upstairs came down and he presented us with a loaf of bread that he'd made. And he told me that he's learned how to cook over this past year, how to make bread over the past year. And he started out by making sourdough bread. And I'm not sure what the thing about sourdough bread was, why people wanted to do that, but it's the most popular thing. But what troubles me most about all this talk about using the time that we have while we're isolating is that it really diminishes the real problems that people are experiencing while staying at home and trying to stay healthy. I suspect that a person who has lost their job isn't using the time to say, well, I may be unemployed and I may be facing mounting bills and possible eviction, but hey, I finally have the time to do X that I've always wanted to do my entire life. And especially when one is facing the dire circumstances posed by the pandemic, financial problems, health problems, psychological and emotional problems that are posed by the loneliness that millions of people around the world are facing, not to mention those who have experienced the virus themselves, who've had the virus, or the loss of loved ones from it. To me, it seems hollow to think of this time as some sort of a gift from the universe, or some capricious deity out there who says, here, take this time. You may get sick, but take the time you have to get better yourself. I think it's even worse. Some people consider it some sort of a test. That perfectionist thing, the pressure to look on this as some sort of a Sabbath, only increases the tension we're living under. It makes us feel less than. It takes us out of living fully into a place that makes us feel that we will never get this thing called life. I mean, if we can't do it while we're trapped at home for a year, when will we ever be able to do it? It takes us from facing the reality of the present into either a past that we regret or a future that we believe we're going to fail at. I know I felt that way many times, especially this past year. You remember when you had to learn those rules of grammar in your English class? There was the past perfect tense, the present perfect tense, and the future perfect tense. I have walked, I had walked, I will have walked. Well, trying to make an imperfect past into a perfect past is definitely going to make you tense. You see what I did there? Past perfect tense. It's a joke. They don't work as well on Zoom for some reason. I don't know why. So maybe it's a good idea to keep that in mind when you feel that pressure to be perfect, that need to feel perfect that steals our happiness. Why are we drawn so much to perfection when we know that there really is no such thing? We know that no person is perfect, no job is perfect, no child is perfect, no minister is perfect, no spiritual community is perfect, no life is perfect. Yeah, there are times when things go well, and maybe they go well for a very long time. And we say something like, oh, that's perfect. Or someone we meet or love, and we say, she's perfect. I mean, even Mary Poppins, though, admitted that she was only practically perfect in every way. She wasn't totally perfect. She was practically perfect. We really admire perfection, or do we really admire authenticity? Personally, I prefer authenticity over perfection. The word authentic is an old Greek word. It comes from the Greek word that means original and genuine, from authentes, one's acting on one's own authority, and breaking it down, autos, which means self, hentes, meaning doer or being. So it's being true to oneself, or being one's true self. Emerson wrote, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. And perfectionism isn't just about doing our best. Perfectionism is an unhealthy need to protect ourselves, to form a wall that we set up to keep others from seeing the real us, the not perfect us. Maybe it's more like a screen that we project the image of perfection onto that we want others to see while we're behind the screen, behind the curtain. Back there is the imperfect, the tense, the frightened person trying to work all of the levers and buttons and bells and microphones to keep up that projected image. You remember that image from The Wizard of Oz, right? The wizard behind the curtain. And once Dorothy realizes that he's not a wizard at all, he had no choice but to reveal his authentic, insecure self. But once he acknowledged that, he turns out to be an authentic, nice, compassionate, kind of goofy, giving person. He's a klutz when it comes to flying a balloon, but he's a nice guy nonetheless. When it comes down to it, it really is about letting go of what other people think about us. Now, that's not a license to act like a jerk to other people. It's not permission to do whatever you want without considering how others are going to be affected. But it is permission to let go of the need to act like you have it all together when you really don't. To let go of what others think and to hold on to what you feel, what you believe to be who you really are. And so that brings us to what we believe about our own worthiness. So many people struggle with this. I think all of us struggle with it at times, but some people more than others, almost constantly. And again, there are a lot of reasons: family dynamics, spiritual upbringing, a lot of what gets thrown at us from society and the media. We run around thinking, oh, I'll feel worthy when I lose 40 pounds, when I learn to make the perfect sourdough bread, when I earn X amount of money a year, and when I get that degree. If everyone thinks I'm a good parent, I'll feel worthy. If I recover from this or that illness. One of the things some people have said once they've recovered from COVID is that some people, friends of theirs, still want to shy away from them. They don't want to be close to them. And that can affect a person's self-worth. The writer Brene Brown says that it's about moving from what will people think to I am enough right now. And I agree, it's about being able to rest in that knowledge of our imperfections and being okay with them. And what I'm trying to get at is that the pressure to be better we've been feeling from all around us, this past year especially, can be a real source of pain and confusion. And I want to be clear, I'm not trying to suggest that the time we may all have on our hands right now shouldn't be used in a constructive way. It's just as unhelpful to sit around worrying about things all day, especially now, than to try to do something that we want to do, right? Greg Creech, who is the director of the Todo Institute, which is an organization in Vermont that teaches the Japanese practice of Nikon, of gratitude. He writes this, he says, anxiety is infused with energy How you use that energy determines whether that anxiety is an asset or a liability. If you turn that anxious energy inward, it simply stirs up more agitation and distress. Nothing changes and your suffering intensifies. But if you turn that energy outward towards some constructive purpose, it becomes a source of strength, of creativity, and it opens up possibilities for influencing your life and the circumstances around you. A wise person does not try to extinguish their anxiety, but to channel it into the world where it can do some good. Or, as I've often quoted many times and said to you many times, it's just like Shunryu Suzuki says, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you could use a little improvement. I think I've said that so often, most of you could probably recite that with me when I say it. It's probably one of my favorite quotes. So let go of that past and the future and the perfect present tension that we have. And we have to live authentically with all the imperfection and the messiness that it brings with us, that life brings with it. Perhaps you remember a few years ago, I spoke about the Japanese aesthetic of Wabi-Sabi. And in traditional Japanese aesthetics, Wabi-Sabi is a worldview that's centered on the acceptance of transience and imperfection. It's sometimes described as one of appreciating beauty that is imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete in nature. Wabi-Sabi, for example, it says, is the beauty of the withered, the weathered, the tarnished, the scarred, the coarse. It's a broken earthenware cup, or better yet, how if you've had children and or grandchildren, young children, and they've made something in school out of Play-Doh or clay or something, and they bring it home, and it's a cup for you. It's a teacup that they want you to use, and it's not exactly perfect. You're not even sure if it can be used, you know. But there's something about that imperfection that's beautiful, not only because it's someone that loves you that made it for you, but there's just something that's in there that's beautiful. That's Wabi-Sabi. It's like an earthenware cup in contrast to a Ming vase. It's an bent old woman walking along the street rather than a fashion model. Maybe you've seen, as you've driven out into the country, those old barns and silos on beautiful farmland, right? And then there's this old barn that's maybe leaning over, part of it is fallen over or something. And yet we sit there and we look at that, and the contrast of that barn to the beautiful surroundings and maybe the rest of the well-maintained buildings, there's just something wabi-sabi about that building. It's beautiful. It's about embracing the simple, about the slow and the uncluttered. So let me quote with another quote from Brene Brown about what it takes to be happy and not perfect. She says, the root of the word courage is cor, the Latin word for heart. In one of its earliest forms, the word courage had a very different definition than it does today. Courage originally meant to speak one's mind by telling all of one's heart. Over time, the definition has changed, and today, courage is more synonymous with being heroic. Heroics are important, and we certainly need heroes, but I think, she says, we've lost touch with the idea that speaking honestly and openly about who we are, about what we're feeling, and about our experiences, good and bad, is the definition of courage. Heroics are often about putting our life on the line. Courage is about putting our vulnerability on the line. If we want to live and love with our whole hearts and engage in the world from a place of worthiness, our first step is practicing the courage it takes to own our stories and to tell the truth about who we are. It doesn't get any braver than that. May it be so.
If you enjoyed this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video.